I don't know this woman.
He looked me dead in the eyes in front of the entire executive board and said, I don't know this woman. Just like that. Flat. Cold. No flicker of hesitation. No tremor in his voice. Nothing. And I stood there in my tailored blazer, holding the quarterly report I had spent 3 weeks preparing, feeling the weight of 22 pairs of eyes pressing into me like stones. My chest tightened. My throat closed. But I did not look away from him. I would not give him the satisfaction. Because here is the thing nobody in that boardroom knew. The thing I had promised to keep buried under NDAs and silence, and the careful distance I kept from him at every company function. Lee Joon-ho was not just my boss. He was my husband, and I was his wife. The secret kind. The kind that only existed on paper, tucked inside a marriage certificate locked in a drawer in his penthouse apartment. The one I had been living in for the past 7 months without a single person knowing. The kind of marriage that came with a contract, a timeline, and a rule that said we would be strangers in public no matter what happened behind closed doors. I had agreed to those terms. I had signed my name on that line. I had told myself it was a business arrangement and nothing more. But standing there while he denied knowing me, something inside me started to crack. And I did not yet know that by the end of that day, he would be the one to shatter everything he had built to keep us hidden. Stay with me. Because this story does not start in that boardroom. It starts 4 months earlier, in a job interview that should have been the best day of my career and instead turned into the beginning of the most complicated chapter of my life. My name is Amara Osei. I am 31 years old. I have a master's degree in finance from Georgetown, and I have been working in corporate strategy for 8 years. I am good at what I do. I know numbers the way some people know music, by feel, by instinct, by a kind of pattern recognition that cannot be fully taught. I had been headhunted by LJH Capital, one of Seoul's most aggressive investment conglomerates, to serve as director of strategic partnerships. It was the kind of opportunity that comes once, maybe twice, in a career. The kind you do not say no to. I did not know the CEO was the kind of man who made you want to say no to everything. Lee Joon-ho walked into the interview room 11 minutes late, sat down without an apology, and immediately began reading the documents I had pre-submitted as if I were not in the room. He had this way of existing that felt like a deliberate statement. Every movement economical. Every silence calculated. He was the most beautiful man I had ever seen in a suit, and also the most exhausting person I had ever been in a room with. He asked me for questions. Only 4. They were not the questions on the standard interview sheet. They were deeper, stranger, designed to corner me. He said, if 2 profitable divisions are cannibalizing each other's market share, what do? I said, I reposition them. You don't burn a house down because 2 rooms are too hot. Something shifted in his expression. Just for a second. Then it was gone. He hired me on the spot. I should have noticed then that Lee Joon-ho paid very close attention to things he pretended not to care about. But I was too excited about the job. Too focused on what came next. Too naive to read the man sitting across from me correctly. Let me tell you what it means to work for someone who is harder on you than anyone else in the building. People tell you it is because they see your potential. People say the ones who push you hardest are the ones who believe in you most. And perhaps sometimes that is true. But in the middle of it, when you are standing in a Monday strategy session having your contribution redirected for the 3rd time in a row, when you are rerunning analyses you know are correct because a one-line message came through his secretary saying, run it again. When you are the best person in the room and the room has been arranged so that you cannot know it. In the middle of all that, potential feels like a very thin excuse. I am a black woman who has spent 8 years in corporate finance. I know what it looks like when someone underestimates you because of what they see when they look at you. I have navigated that particular exhaustion in boardrooms across 2 countries, and I have learned to carry it without putting it down where anyone can see it. What Lee Joon-ho was doing did not feel like underestimation. That was the strange thing. The thing that kept me off balance. Because when he redirected my contributions, he used them. When he sent my analyses back, they came back with questions that were genuinely sophisticated. Questions that showed he had read every line, understood every assumption, and wanted them pressure-tested further rather than simply redone. When he passed my office without looking in, his pace changed. Just slightly. A fraction of a second longer than it needed to be for someone who had no interest in what was happening inside. He was not dismissing me. He was doing something else. Something I did not have the full picture of yet. The picture arrived 6 weeks in, and it arrived the way the most important information always does, abruptly, at an inconvenient hour, from a direction you were not looking. My first 3 months at LJH Capital were everything I had hoped for professionally and nothing I had prepared for personally. The work was extraordinary. The team was sharp. The resources were limitless. And my boss treated me like I was invisible. Not invisible the way you are when someone genuinely does not notice you. Invisible the way you are when someone is working very hard not to notice you. There is a difference. One is indifference. The other is effort. He would walk past my office without looking in. He would skip over my contributions in meetings, only to bring them back up 10 minutes later as if they were his own thoughts arriving in real time. He would assign me the most complex projects and then send his feedback through his secretary, never directly. People started talking, because he was not like this with anyone else. With the other department heads, he was cold but engaged, respectful in that sharp, boardroom way. With me, there was something else happening, something that looked, from the outside, like disdain. My colleague Minji pulled me aside once in the elevator and whispered, "Don't take it personally. He's never like this. I think he actually..." And then the elevator opened, and she stopped herself and smiled too wide and said, "Never mind. He respects competence. You'll see." She did not finish that sentence, and I let it go. What I did not know yet, what nobody outside of the chairman's inner circle knew, was that Lee Joon-ho had a problem, a serious one. His grandfather, the founder of LJH Capital, had written a clause into the original company charter, a clause that had sat dormant for decades and had been awakened at the worst possible time. It said, in summary, that a merger with Osei Holdings, my family's company, as it turned out, a thing I had not disclosed and neither had the headhunters, could only be finalized if the two families were joined by marriage. It was archaic. It was absurd. It was also legally binding. And so, 6 weeks into my employment, Lee Joon-ho called me into his office at 8 o'clock on a Thursday evening, poured 2 glasses of water, slid a folder across his desk, and said, in the flattest voice I had ever heard from a human being, "I need you to marry me." I stared at him. He stared back. "It would be a contract marriage," he said. 1 year. Legally recognized. Mutually beneficial. You would receive a 20% equity stake in LJH Capital and a bonus structure that would make your current salary look like a footnote. In return, you would fulfill the legal requirement of the merger clause and allow the Osei LJH deal to close. "You're serious," I said. "I don't make jokes," he said. I believed him. I asked for 48 hours. He gave me 24. I spent most of that time on the phone with my mother, who told me to read every line of the contract. I spent the rest of it staring at the clause itself, which I had a lawyer friend review at midnight, who confirmed it was ironclad and also that I was living in a drama. I signed. And just like that, I became Mrs. Lee. In secret. Always in secret. Let me tell you what it is actually like to sign a marriage contract at 2 in the morning. My lawyer friend, who had stayed up past midnight to read it, looked at me through the phone screen and said, "You know this is insane, right?" "I know," I said. "He is asking you to marry him for a clause written by a man who has been dead for 30 years. "I know. And you're going to do it." "The equity stake is real," I said. "The merger is real. The opportunity is real." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Amara, is he?" I thought about the interview room. For questions. The way his pen had gone still when I answered the first one. The way he had looked at me. Not through me. Not past me. But at me. With the particular attention of someone encountering something unexpected. "Yes," I said. "He's very real." She sighed. She said, "Call me if you need an exit." "I will," I said. I signed my name on 26 pages of the most precisely worded marriage contract I had ever read. And then I lay in bed in my apartment, the last night I would spend in it before moving into his, and stared at the ceiling and thought about all the ways this could go wrong. There were many. And then I thought about the way he had said I don't make jokes, and the flat certainty of it, and the strange comfort of being in a room with someone that honest about exactly who they were. And I thought, maybe not all of the ways. The rules of the secret. The contract was 26 pages long. But really, it came down to 4 rules. No public displays of affection. No disclosure to colleagues, media, or third parties. No interference in each other's personal or professional lives outside what the merger required. And no emotional entanglement. That last one was written in cleaner legal language. Something about maintaining professional boundaries and ensuring that the nature of the arrangement did not compromise either party's personal freedom. But what it meant, stripped down to plain words, was simple. Don't fall in love. I had no intention of falling in love. I had been burned before by men who confused intensity with investment. I was not going to make that mistake with a man who had literally put a no-feelings clause in our marriage paperwork. We moved into his penthouse the week after the ceremony. A quiet, private thing at the district office with 2 witnesses who were paid to forget. I had a separate bedroom. He had his. The apartment was large enough that we could go days without crossing paths if we managed our schedules correctly. We usually managed our schedules correctly, but not always. The first crack appeared 3 weeks after we moved in together. It was 2 in the morning. I was in the kitchen because I could not sleep. I never sleep well in new spaces, and I was making ginger tea the way my grandmother taught me, with fresh root and a strip of orange peel. He came in wearing a white shirt and dark pants like he had just come from somewhere, though I had heard no door. He stopped when he saw me. I said, I couldn't sleep. He said nothing. He went to the refrigerator, took out a container of leftover rice, stood at the counter and ate it cold without heating it, staring at the surface of the kitchen island like it had offended him. I watched him for a moment. Then I said, that's better warm. He glanced at me sideways. The rice, I said. He put the container down. He went to the cabinet. He took out a bowl. He heated it. We sat on opposite sides of the kitchen island in complete silence at 2 in the morning, him with his rice and me with my ginger tea, not looking at each other. And somehow it was the most comfortable I had felt since I signed those papers. I did not tell him that. But the next morning, when I came into the kitchen before work, there was a fresh pot of ginger tea sitting on the stove, still warm. He was already gone. I stood there looking at that teapot for a long time. At work, nothing changed. He was as distant and demanding as ever, harder on me than anyone else, still, sending his feedback through intermediaries, skipping my name in meetings. But I started noticing things I had not caught before. When I presented in the Monday strategy sessions, he would go very still. Not bored still, alert still. The kind of stillness predators have when something has their attention and they do not want the thing to know it. His pen would stop moving. His eyes would fix on the table, but his head would tilt slightly, a degree, maybe 2, in my direction. He remembered everything I said. I would catch it weeks later when he referenced a number I had mentioned casually or a market insight I had dropped into conversation without thinking it was important. He cataloged me, without looking like he was doing it. Once, during a site visit to one of their subsidiary offices, I slipped on a wet floor in the lobby. Just a skid, not a fall. I caught myself on a column, and from across the room, Lee Joon-ho took 3 steps toward me before he stopped himself. 3 steps. Then he turned around and kept walking like he had simply changed direction for no reason. Nobody else noticed. I noticed. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself a lot of things in those months. The private moments were the ones that cost me most. Not the big ones, not the teapot or the lobby moment. The small ones. The ones that happened so quietly I almost missed them and then could not stop thinking about them. Like the time I was working late on a Thursday, and he came to my office door, knocked, which he never did, always simply walked into every room he owned as though it existed to receive him, and he stood in the doorway and said, "You haven't eaten." It was not a question. It was not a suggestion. It was the flat, declarative delivery of a fact, the way he said everything. "I'm finishing the risk assessment," I said, without looking up. He did not say anything else. He left. 20 minutes later, there was food on the corner of my desk. A container from the Japanese restaurant 3 blocks away that I had mentioned exactly once, in passing, for weeks before that night, while explaining to Minji why I had been distracted at a Tuesday briefing. I had said their miso was better than anywhere else I had tried in Seoul. He had remembered. He had gone out of his way. And then he had put the food down and disappeared without waiting for a thank you, because Lee Joon-ho did not do things to be thanked. He did them because he had decided they needed to be done. I ate the miso. I thought about what that meant for a very long time. And then there was the night of the board dinner, a mandatory quarterly event, which we had navigated before by being in the same room and exchanging no more than professional courtesies. We were good at this. We had constructed a careful architecture of nearness without closeness, proximity without intimacy. But that night, one of the external board members, a man in his 60s who made a habit of aggressive informality, had come to stand beside me at the bar and put his hand on my shoulder and said something I will not repeat here, in a voice that was meant to be charming and landed like a door closing in a dark room. I stepped back, smoothly, professionally. I extracted myself with the particular grace that women develop from years of practice in rooms where they are outnumbered. From across the room, I saw Lee Joon-ho watching. Not the way he usually watched me. The cataloging attention, the careful invisible focus. This time, his eyes were fixed on that board member with an expression so controlled it was nearly blank, except for one thing. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see the muscle working from 20 feet away. He did not come over. He did not interfere. He had not yet become the man who stood up in boardrooms without warning. He was still the man who followed the rules. But after the dinner, in the car on the way home, he said, "Kwon Byung-soo, the external member." "I know who he is," I said. "Did he?" "I handled it," I said. A pause. "Did you?" he said. Not a question. The same flat declarative, but with something underneath it that was not flat at all. "Yes," I said. "I always do." He did not say anything else. But for the rest of the ride, his hands were very still on his knees. Too still. The stillness of a man suppressing something he had not decided to act on yet. I filed that away, next to the teapot and the 3 steps and the miso. I filed it, and I told myself none of it meant anything. I was becoming very good at lying to myself. The trigger. His name was David Park. Korean-American, transferred from the New York office in the 4th month of my contract marriage. He was 34, easy to laugh with, and had the rare quality of actually listening when someone else was speaking, not waiting for his turn, but actually listening. He became my ally almost immediately. In a company culture that was hierarchically rigid and sometimes suffocating, David was a relief. He was the kind of colleague who sent encouraging messages before big presentations and remembered to ask how things went afterward. He defended my analyses in meetings when senior partners tried to water them down. He told the head of risk management publicly that my recommendation on the Busan acquisition was the clearest strategic case he had seen in 3 years, and the room went quiet in a way that felt like validation. I was grateful. That was all it was. Gratitude and professional warmth. Lee Joon-ho, apparently, did not see it that way. I noticed his temperature changing around the 3rd week of David's tenure. Not loudly. Nothing Lee Joon-ho did was loud. But the stillness he had when David and I talked in group settings was a different kind of stillness from the one he had when he paid attention to my presentations. This one had an edge to it, like a wire pulled just barely too tight. I told myself I was imagining it. Then came the board meeting. It was a Wednesday. The quarterly review plus a presentation on the merger timeline, which was entering its final documentation phase. The boardroom was full, 12 executives, 4 external board members, 2 legal representatives, and Lee Joon-ho at the head of the table, perfectly composed, impeccably dressed, looking like he had been carved from very expensive, very cold stone. I was presenting the partnership integration framework. I had worked on it for 3 weeks. I knew every number, every risk projection, every contingency scenario. I was in the middle of walking through phase 2 when David, who was seated 2 chairs down from me, leaned forward to point at a figure on the shared screen. His hand crossed the table, and his fingers briefly, lightly, accidentally brushed the back of mine as he reached toward the projection clicker. It lasted less than a second. It meant absolutely nothing, but I felt the room change. I cannot explain it better than that. The air in the room shifted, like a pressure drop before a storm. I looked up from my notes, and I saw Lee Joon-ho. His jaw was set. His pen had stopped. Both hands were flat on the table. His eyes had moved from the screen to the point where David's hand had been, and they stayed there for 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then they moved to me. I held his gaze. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes did. If you asked me to describe what I saw in that moment, I would say it was the look of a man who had made a decision he had not yet announced. I should have been afraid of that look. Later, I would realize I should have been afraid. Instead, I looked back at my notes and kept presenting. Because that was what professionals did. That was what the contract required. Before I tell you what happened next, and I need you to understand, what happened next changed everything. Make sure you are watching to the end, because what he did in that room will stay with you. Like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. Now let me tell you what Lee Joon-ho did. The exposure. He stood up. He just stood up. Right in the middle of a sentence that wasn't even mine. right in the middle of David confirming a projection figure. Lee Joon-ho pushed back his chair and rose to his full height, and the room went immediately silent. Everyone looked at him. Of course everyone looked at him. He was the CEO. He was the room. "Mr. Park," he said. His voice was perfectly level, perfectly controlled. The kind of control that takes years to manufacture and contains something volcanic underneath. David looked up. "Yes. You're terminated." The room stopped breathing. David blinked. "I'm sorry." "Effective immediately. HR will process your exit documentation. You may collect your personal items today." Junho, one of the board members, started. "Chairman Lee." Lee Junho corrected, without looking away from David. The board member went quiet. David looked around the room, then back at Lee Joon-ho. His expression was confused, not angry. "Not yet. Can I ask what this is about?" And Lee Joon-ho looked at him for one long moment. Then he looked at me. And then, in front of 12 executives, 4 board members, and 2 lawyers, he said, "You touched my wife's hand." The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. It was the kind that has texture. You could feel it pressing against your eardrums. Every head in the room turned to me. I felt my face go completely still. A survival response. The same stillness I had learned as a child whenever something happened that I needed to process before I reacted. One of the senior executives said, slowly, "Wife." Lee Joon-ho did not look away from me. "Amara Osei. My wife. We were married 7 months ago." More silence. Then everyone started talking at once. I don't remember moving from my chair. But suddenly I was in the hallway, and Lee Joon-ho was behind me, and I heard the boardroom door click shut, and I turned around. "What?" I said. "Did you just do?" He looked at me. "What needed to be done? You exposed us. You violated the contract. You fired a man for accidentally touching my hand during a presentation. He touched you. It was an accident. It was nothing. It was a quarter of a second. I'm aware of how long it was," he said, and something in his voice told me he had counted it. I stared at him. "You realize what you've done? They're going to question the merger. They're going to question your judgment. The board will adjust. You can't just..." I stopped. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum because my heart was doing something I did not have a name for. This was supposed to be a secret. That was the whole point. That was the contract. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You are mine, whether they know it or not." It landed in my chest like a stone dropped in still water. Concentric circles spreading out. Possessive. Unrepentant. Impossible. I looked at this man, this cold, controlled, maddening man who made ginger tea in the dark and remembered every number I ever said and fired someone for a quarter-second brush of a hand. And I felt something I absolutely could not afford to feel. I walked away. Emotional war. The next 72 hours were the quietest and most suffocating of my life. I moved my things to the guest room that had technically always been mine, but that I had stopped using around month 3 for reasons I had refused to examine. I locked the door. I put my headphones in and I worked, and I did not go to the kitchen at 2 in the morning, and I did not look for a teapot. At work, the exposure detonated exactly the way I knew it would. By Thursday morning, the news had spread through every floor of LJH Capital. By Thursday afternoon, it had leaked to 2 financial news outlets. By Friday, there were 3 different anonymous forum threads speculating about whether the marriage was genuine, whether I had used it to accelerate my position in the company, whether the merger was actually a personal deal dressed up in corporate language. People looked at me differently. Some with awe, some with suspicion, some with a kind of calculation, like they were reordering everything they thought they knew about how power worked in this building. The board called an emergency session. Not a full meeting, a closed session, just the core 5 members, with Lee Joon-ho and the company's general counsel. I was not invited. I was the subject. Minji found me in my office afterward and closed the door and sat down and said, "They're questioning the merger structure. They want to know if there's a conflict of interest." "There isn't," I said. "I know," she said. "But they're also," she hesitated. "They're questioning his judgment. Some of the external board members think firing David Park was disproportionate. They're using language like impulsive and personal liability." "Those are accurate words," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "But I will be." What I did not say, what I had not yet fully admitted to myself, was that underneath my anger was something far more complicated. Because the thing that was making me angriest was not the exposure itself. It was the reason for it. He had not claimed me because he respected me. He had not stood up in that boardroom because he had suddenly decided our marriage deserved to be real. He had done it because another man had touched my hand, and something in him had overridden every calculated, controlled, contract-bound decision he had ever made. He had done it out of jealousy, and I could not decide if that was the most offensive thing that had ever happened to me or the most devastating proof of something I was not ready to name. At home, he moved around the apartment like a man who had accepted the consequences of a thing he did not regret doing. He did not apologize. He did not explain himself further. He cooked dinner twice that week and left mine outside my door in a covered plate without knocking. I ate it both times. I hated that I ate it. On the fifth night, I heard him in the kitchen at an hour I should not have been awake for, and I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling and thought about the contract. About the expiration date that was now only 5 months away. About the clause that said either party could petition for early dissolution if the terms were materially breached. He had materially breached the terms. I had grounds to walk away. I did not sleep for most of that night, because I kept thinking about 3 steps. The 3 steps he had taken across a lobby before he stopped himself. The teapot on the stove. The way he went still when I spoke, like my voice was something he was memorizing. And the way he had looked at me in that boardroom. Not at David. At me. Like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. I know you feel that. I know you do. Because I felt it too, and I did not want to feel it. Stay with me. We are not even close to done. Drop a comment right now if you think she should stay or walk away. I want to know. Let me tell you something about loving someone who has been trained to hide their love. It does not look the way love looks in stories. It does not arrive with declarations and grand gestures and all the language that makes love legible. It arrives in patterns, in repetitions, in the things someone does when they think you are not watching, or when they think they can frame the action as something other than what it is. I had been watching Lee Joon-ho for 7 months by the time the board meeting happened, and what I had collected, in that time, was an archive of things he had done that were categorically unexplainable if the only framework you used was business. There was the miso. There was the teapot. There was the board dinner. There was the time he had reassigned 3 of my most difficult and uncooperative reports to other supervisors in what was officially recorded as a departmental restructuring, which coincidentally happened the week after one of them had publicly undermined my analysis in a full team meeting. Lee Joon-ho had not mentioned it to me. I had figured it out 2 weeks later by looking at the org chart. There was the weekend I had been ill, a bad flu, the kind that leaves you horizontal and useless, and had sent a message to my assistant to reschedule my Monday meetings. By Sunday evening, there was a delivery at the door, a bag from a pharmacy with flu medication, 2 different kinds of electrolyte drinks, and a packet of the specific brand of ginger tea I bought every week, not the generic kind, the specific imported brand that only one store in the district carried. He had not knocked. He had not left a note. The receipt was unsigned. I lay in bed with my flu medication and my ginger tea, and I thought, this man is going to be a problem. I had not admitted yet that he already was. The online speculation got worse before it got better. Someone leaked the detail that the marriage had been kept secret for 7 months, and that detonated a whole new wave of commentary. Think pieces appeared. Social media lit up. The narrative was messy and mostly wrong, but the one thread running through all of it, the thing that everyone seemed to find most compelling, was why. Why had he hidden it? And now, why had he exposed it? I found myself reading those threads at midnight with my knees pulled to my chest and my phone too close to my face, which is something I only do when I am avoiding thinking about something more important. Lee Joon-ho, for his part, said nothing publicly. He had his communications team issue a brief statement confirming the marriage and declining further comment. He went about his work with the same glacial precision he always had, except that now, when he passed my office, he looked in. Every time. Not long. Not meaningfully. Just a glance. The way you check on something you are worried about without wanting the thing to know you are worried. I noticed. I always noticed. I had the uncomfortable feeling that he knew I noticed, and that this was, on some level, exactly what he intended. On the 6th day after the exposure, I came out of a late meeting to find him in the corridor outside the conference room. Standing there. Just waiting. Which was not something Lee Joon-ho did. Lee Joon-ho did not wait. Walk with me, he said. It was not a request, but it also was not the way he usually spoke to me at work. which was through intermediaries or in cold, professional corridors with nothing personal in his voice. There was something different in the way he said those 3 words. I walked. We went down to the executive floor terrace. It was a cold evening. The city stretched out below us in that spectacular, indifferent way cities have. All light and movement and zero concern for what any one person was feeling. He stood at the railing. I stood 2 feet away from him. We looked at the city. Then he said, "The board is requesting an annulment." I had expected this. To protect the company's image. Yes. And what did you say? He was quiet for a moment. A very specific kind of quiet that I had learned, over 7 months, meant he was choosing between several versions of an answer. I said I would consider it, he said. Something cold moved through me. I see. Amara. It was the first time, since the boardroom, that he had said my name. I turned to look at him. He was already looking at me. And I saw it again. That look from the hallway after the exposure, the one that had made the air in my chest go thin. The board will meet again on Friday, he said. And I wanted you to know before they did. I looked at him for a long time. You wanted me to know? What? He turned back to the city. Because you deserve to know things before other people decide them for you. I did not say anything. We stood there for another few minutes. Then I went back inside, and he stayed at the railing. I thought about that terrace moment for the rest of the week. About the sentence he had said, because you deserve to know things before other people decide them for you. It was such a specific thing to say, so particular, so much more personal than anything the contract required. Lee Joon-ho was a man who was precise with language. He did not make flourishes or use more words than a situation demanded. If he said something that specific, it was because he meant it in a way that went beyond the surface. He thought about what I deserved. That was the thing that kept coming back to me. In 7 months, I had learned to navigate his coldness. I had learned to decode his patterns. I had learned to exist in proximity to a man who ran an empire with one hand and made ginger tea with the other and pretended both things were equally clinical. But I had not prepared for the moment he would look at me like my dignity was something he held himself accountable for. I did not know what to do with that. So I did what I always do with things I cannot organize. I worked. I worked 16-hour days. I buried myself in merger documentation. I put together a comprehensive risk analysis of the board's restructuring proposal that was so thorough and so devastating in its implications that even the external board members who wanted to move against Lee Junho had to acknowledge it was extraordinary work. Minji read it on a Thursday morning and looked at me and said, "You wrote this in 3 days?" 4, I said. "Amara," she said, very gently, "when did you last sleep?" I did not answer that. She put the report down. "You're fighting for him," she said. "I'm fighting for the company," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who has heard a very transparent lie and is deciding whether to call it out. Then she said, "Okay," and picked the report back up. But I sat with what she had said for the rest of the day. Fighting for him. Was I? Breaking point. I asked him on a Sunday. He was in the living room, which he used as a second office on weekends, papers spread across the coffee table, laptop open, reading glasses on. Reading glasses I had not known he owned until month 2, which he always removed before leaving any room I was also in, as if they were a vulnerability he was protecting. He had not noticed me come in. I sat down on the opposite end of the sofa and I said, without preliminary, "Why did you expose us?" He looked up. He did not remove the glasses. "In the boardroom," I said, "after 7 months of rules. After all of it. Why then?" He put his papers down. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he was going to give me the legal answer. Something about the merger timeline or the board's quarterly review or some strategic calculation I had not seen. Then he said, "Because I couldn't stand another man looking at you like that." I held very still. "He looked at you like you were something he could have," Lee Joon-ho said. His voice was even. It always was. But the evenness had a different texture now, and I found that I could not tolerate it. "He was a colleague," I said. "I know what he was. You fired him. You violated the contract. You humiliated me in front of the board. I know what I did." "Then why?" I heard the crack in my own voice and hated it. "What gave you the right to claim me in front of all those people when you had spent 7 months pretending I didn't exist?" Silence. A long one. Then, "You're right." I blinked. Lee Joon-ho did not say those words. "You're right," he said again, and he looked at me with something in his face that I had never seen there before. Something unguarded, raw in a way that seemed physically uncomfortable for him, like taking off armor in the middle of a field. I denied you first. I set the terms that kept you invisible, and then I broke them the moment someone else saw what I had been choosing not to look at. The room was very quiet. I didn't plan to fall in love with you, he said. That was not part of any calculation I made. It was not in the contract. It was not supposed to happen. I looked at him. But I did, he said, and I handled it very badly. Badly, I repeated. That's one word for it. Something close to a grimace crossed his face. On Lee Joon-ho, that was practically theatrics. I pushed you away because I did not know what to do with the fact that I didn't want to push you away. The rules were mine. I made them because I thought they would protect. He stopped. Protect what? He looked at me. Me. I felt something shift in my chest. Like a weight redistributed. Not removed, but moved. I'm not asking you to forgive what I did, he said. I'm explaining it because you deserve an explanation. I looked at this man, this controlled, cold, impossible, ginger tea making, 3 steps across a lobby man, and I thought about everything the last 7 months had been. I said, you hurt me. Yes. You humiliated me. Yes. You didn't even ask me. You didn't warn me or consult me or give me the choice of how to handle it. You just stood up and announced me like a property claim. Yes, he said quietly. I did. And you're not sorry you did it. He was quiet. Junho. He looked at me directly. I am sorry that I hurt you. I am sorry that I made it look like a claim rather than a declaration. I am not sorry that the world knows. He paused. I am sorry that I was the reason the world didn't know sooner. I looked away, out the window, at the city that continued existing without any interest in the implosion happening on the 14th floor. The board wants an annulment, I said. I know. They're going to push for it at Friday's meeting. I know. And if you refuse, they're going to question your fitness to lead the company. They already are. I know, he said for the 3rd time. Then what are you going to do? He looked at me, and for the first time in 7 months, his face did not close off. The wall did not go up. He let me see what was underneath it. And what was underneath it was a man who had built an empire around control and had just discovered there was one thing he could not control. I'm going to choose, he said. The final scene. Friday came the way important things do. Too slowly for days, and then suddenly too fast. I woke up that morning and lay in the guest room, my room, still for now, and stared at the ceiling and tried to organize my feelings into something manageable. I had spent my whole career organizing complex things into manageable forms. Markets, risk projections, corporate integration timelines. Feelings, I was discovering, were significantly less cooperative. I did not know what I wanted. That was the truth I had been avoiding for weeks. Because what I wanted was tangled up in what I had agreed to, and what he had done, and what he had said, and the teapot, and the reading glasses, and 3 steps across a lobby. It was tangled up in the months of distance that had felt, in retrospect, like a man drowning silently and choosing silence over the word help. I got dressed. I went to the office. By the time I reached my floor, I could feel the tension in the building. It had a specific quality, the kind that settles into an organization before something irreversible happens. People moved more quietly. Conversation stopped when I walked past. Minji found me before I even reached my desk and said, very quietly, the board is already in the room. How early? An hour. That was significant. Board members who arrived an hour early wanted something decided before it could be debated. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. I tried to work. At 10 o'clock, my phone buzzed. One message. From Lee Joon-ho. It said, don't leave the building. I put my phone face down on the desk. 11 minutes later, I counted. I heard the change in the building again. The quality of the quiet shifted. The hum of an organization waiting for an outcome became the hum of an organization that had just received one. Minji appeared in my doorway. He said no, she said. Her voice had something in it I could not immediately classify. Oh, maybe. Or the specific kind of disbelief that comes from watching someone do something you did not think people actually did. I looked up. They gave him the terms. Annulment, official statement, return to standard governance structure. He listened to all of it. She paused. And then he said, she stopped. What did he say? I asked. She took a breath. He said, she stays. As my wife. And then he walked out. The room held its breath. Or maybe that was just me. I stood up. I did not know exactly where I was going. I did not have a plan. I had spent my entire career being a person with a plan, and in this moment I had nothing. Just movement. Just the impulse to close the distance between where I was and where he was. I found him in the corridor outside the boardroom. He was standing with his back to the wall, head tilted slightly back, eyes closed. The only time I had ever seen him not in motion was when he thought no one was watching. He opened his eyes when he heard me. We looked at each other from 20 feet away. I crossed the distance. I stood in front of him and I said, "You understand what you just gave up?" "Yes," he said. "The board will move against you. They have grounds now. They can challenge your leadership, restructure your authority. Amara. And the merger could fall apart entirely, which means everything we agreed to, everything we built for the last 7 months. Amara." I stopped. He looked at me with no wall, no calculation, no careful distance. Just Lee Joon-ho. Exhausted. Decided. Undefended. "I know what I gave up," he said. "I chose what I was keeping." I looked at him for a long moment. I thought about contracts and timelines and clauses about emotional entanglement. I thought about everything a no-feelings clause is supposed to prevent and everything it had completely failed to prevent. I thought about a man who made ginger tea at 2 in the morning and learned to leave it on the stove. I said, "If we do this, if we make this real, you don't get to make the rules alone." Something moved through his expression. Agreed. I won't be invisible. Not to protect you. Not to protect the company. Not for any reason. Agreed. And if you ever... I paused, because I needed to say it clearly. "If you ever deny me in a room full of people again, I will leave. Contract or no contract." He held my gaze. "I know," he said. "I won't. I haven't forgiven you yet," I said. "I know," he said again. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to give me time to earn it." I stood there in that corridor with 22 people probably watching through the glass panels and 6 cameras recording and an entire company holding its collective breath, and I thought about time. About what it cost. About what it was worth. Then I said, "Okay." Just that. One word. But I watched it land in him like the first morning of spring after a very long winter. Not dramatic. Just present. Real. He exhaled. I exhaled. We did not touch. Not there. Not yet. The corridor was public and we were both people who had learned, in different ways, not to be vulnerable in public. But we stood there, close enough that I could see the fine detail of his expression for the first time without trying to decode it from across a room. And something between us settled into a different shape. Not the shape of a contract. Not the shape of a secret. Something new. Something that didn't have a clause for termination. The board reconvened that afternoon with 2 new members and a restructured governance proposal that Lee Joon-ho accepted on every point except one. The one he did not accept was the annulment. They argued. He listened. He did not move. The merger, as it turned out, survived. It survived because the Osei family, my family, specifically my father, who called me from Lagos that evening and laughed for 45 seconds before saying anything else, confirmed their commitment regardless of the marital clause, because the business fundamentals were strong, because the numbers worked, because Amara Osei had spent 7 months making sure they did. The clause, ironically, had never needed enforcing. The deal was going to close because of the work. It had always been going to close because of the work. Lee Joon-ho and I drove home together that evening in the back of his car. We sat in our usual positions, him near the window, me near the other window, the precise and careful distance of 2 people who had been negotiating space for 7 months. Except that about 12 minutes into the drive, without looking at me, he moved his hand from his lap to the seat between us. Not taking my hand, just placing his there, leaving it. I looked at it. I looked at him. He was looking out the window. I moved my hand to the seat between us 2. Our fingers didn't quite touch. Maybe an inch of space between them. But we stayed like that for the rest of the drive. Him watching the city pass outside. Me watching the city pass outside. That inch of space between our hands, which felt, at that moment, like the most significant real estate on earth. When the car stopped, he got out first, because that was the habit. He walked to my side and opened the door, because that was also the habit. And I stepped out, and we stood on the pavement outside the building, and he offered me his arm the way he had once or twice at required public functions, the neutral version, the version with distance in it. I took it, and we walked inside, not as a contract, not as a secret, as something we were still figuring out, together, with room for error and forgiveness and the slow, Difficult work of learning to choose someone instead of just binding yourself to them on paper. 3 weeks after the boardroom. On a Saturday morning when the light in Seoul was pale gold and the city was doing its quiet weekend breathing, I came into the kitchen to find Lee Joon-ho making breakfast. Not leftovers he had reheated. Not a delivery from somewhere. Actual breakfast, from scratch, eggs in a pan, rice in the cooker, a small bowl of kimchi from the batch his housekeeper had brought, and on the counter, already steeping in the second nicest mug we owned, ginger tea. He heard me come in. He did not turn around immediately. He flipped the eggs. He adjusted the flame. He took his time. Then he said, without looking at me, sit down. Not a request. It was never a request with him. But I had stopped minding that. I sat down. He brought the food. He put the mug in front of me. He sat across from me with his own bowl of rice, and we ate breakfast in the same comfortable, slightly charged silence we had been building for months in that kitchen, at 2 in the morning, in the dark, thinking the other person could not see us clearly. We could always see each other clearly. After a while he said, I spoke with your father. I looked up. He called me. Lee Junho said, which I had not expected, my father calling Lee Junho directly, without telling me. He said several things, some of which I deserved, some of which I am still considering. What did he say? He said that his daughter does not do anything halfway, that if she chose to give someone her time and her trust and her expertise, it was the most significant investment that person would ever receive in their life, and that he hoped I understood the weight of what had been offered to me before I decided how to handle it. I looked at him. He also said, Lee Joon-ho continued, with something that was almost, a smile, that if I hurt you again he would fly to Seoul personally to speak with me about it. And he was very specific about what speaking meant in this context. I felt something warm move through me that I gave up trying to suppress. That sounds like him. Yes, he said. I liked him immediately. We looked at each other across the breakfast table, across the miso and the ginger tea and 7 months of careful architecture that had cracked, finally, into something more honest. I said, I am going to be very difficult to be in a relationship with. I know, he said. I have high standards. I do not forgive quickly. I will push back on you constantly. I will not be managed or handled or kept at a comfortable distance when things get complicated. I know, he said. I have watched you manage everyone in your life with perfect control, and I am telling you clearly that it will not work on me. Amara, he said. What? I know, he said for the 3rd time. That is why I chose you. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, Seoul went on being Seoul, indifferent, glittering, enormous. Inside, Lee Joon-ho and I sat across from each other over breakfast like 2 people who had walked a very long way around something they could have reached much more directly, and who had arrived anyway. It was enough. For now, it was more than enough. If this story did something to you, if you feel the weight of it sitting in your chest the way I felt it sitting in mine, then you already know why these kinds of stories matter. They are not just drama. They are about the moments when the walls we build to protect ourselves become the very thing that keeps us from the life we actually want. Lee Joon-ho built a beautiful wall, cold and precise and impenetrable, constructed over years of being a man who everyone needed something from and nobody simply wanted to know. He had turned remoteness into architecture, control into a language, distance into safety, and then he stood in a boardroom in front of 22 people and watched it fall. For him, for a man like that, that moment in the boardroom was not just an act of jealousy. It was an act of total surrender. He had spent his entire professional life making decisions from behind glass. Calculated, considered, unreachable. And in one moment, something in him decided that the glass was no longer worth the view it was costing him. I have thought about that moment a great deal since. Not about the humiliation, though the humiliation was real. Not about the contract breach, though that was real too. I have thought about what it actually takes for a person to do something they cannot take back. Something they know will be costly. Something that exposes them completely. Most people do not do those things. Most people, even the ones who feel everything deeply, keep the feeling inside the glass. They manage it. They redirect it. They perform the controlled version of themselves until the uncontrolled feeling passes or gets buried under enough work and time and deliberate distance. Lee Joon-ho was the most controlled person I had ever met in a professional environment. He had the emotional discipline of someone who had been practicing it since childhood, who had learned early that showing your hand was how you lost. And then he lost his hand completely, in front of everyone, because another man's fingers crossed a table. I am not saying it was okay. I am saying it was real in a way that left me no room to pretend otherwise. And I spent 7 months telling myself a teapot was just a teapot. I spent 7 months cataloging things I refused to call evidence, filing observations I refused to call feelings, living in an apartment with a man I refused to call mine, even inside my own head, even at 2 in the morning over ginger tea and leftover rice. Sometimes love arrives in the least convenient forms. Sometimes it shows up disguised as a contract, or a cold boss who treats you worst because you terrify him most, or a man who takes 3 steps across a lobby before he catches himself and pretends he was going somewhere else all along. The question is what you do when you finally see it. I chose to stand in a corridor and say okay. He chose to walk out of a boardroom. We are still learning the rest. Still negotiating the distance between 2 people who came to each other sideways, through paperwork and silence, and all the language that was not language. Still finding the words for the things that happened in kitchens at 2 in the morning when we thought the darkness made it safe. It was never dark enough to hide everything. We both knew that. We just needed time to stop pretending. Minji texted me 3 days after the boardroom. It said, I knew it. I told you. I didn't finish my sentence, but I knew it. I wrote back. You were going to say he actually what? She wrote back 3 crying laughing emojis, and then, I was going to say I think he actually has it bad for you. But you look like you needed to figure it out yourself. She was not wrong. Some things you have to figure out yourself. Even when the evidence is right in front of you. Even when everyone around you has already seen it. Even when the man himself is doing everything but saying it out loud. You have to come to it on your own terms. You have to believe it in your own time. The contract has 11 weeks left on its original term. We are not counting down to it anymore. There is a difference between a marriage that exists on paper and a marriage that exists in the way 2 people move around each other, make space for each other, leave ginger tea on the stove for each other in the cold, early hours of the morning. One of those things can be dissolved. The other one takes longer than 11 weeks to build, and longer than any board meeting to dismantle. We built the second one without meaning to. That is the part nobody in the merger documentation accounts for. That is the part nobody writes a clause for. You can legislate proximity. You cannot legislate what happens inside it. You cannot contract your way out of the particular intimacy of sharing a kitchen with someone in the dark, of learning the exact sound someone makes when they are thinking, of knowing what another person looks like when they are choosing between the version of themselves they show the world and the one they barely let themselves see in private. What happens inside proximity, it turns out, is everything. If you want more stories like this, Afro-Korean drama, love that does not come easy, power and vulnerability, and all the complicated things in between, subscribe. Like this video. Share it with someone who stays up too late watching things that make them feel too much. Because you are not alone in that. And neither were we. Thank you for watching.